All right, hello everybody. It is time to talk Tintin. This one took a little bit longer than I expected because even though they're comic books, there are 22 of them that are complete and one of them that's incomplete that I have, and each of them is a little over 60 pages, and so if it comes out to me going through about 1,400 pages of comics over the last week or so. So, Tintin is a series of comic books that was written by a Belgian artist named Hergé, or his pen name was Hergé. My dad had a stack of these when I was a kid, and every once in a while I would crack one open, and they're enjoyable. They're fun little adventures that are mostly suitable for a reasonable kid. That there is some gunplay and poison and all that stuff, but it's really kind of on the level of like a Johnny Quest cartoon. Very rarely does anyone actually, die on screen, so to speak. In fact, there is one story where two guys get into a fight, fall off a boat, and sink to the bottom of the ocean, and they're fighting, struggling as they're sinking in the ocean, and then the next frame has two like flying devils carting them away into the sky. It's actually kind of what's the word? Kind of jarring when I saw that one. But anyway, I've re-gone through all these, and definitely my love for them is a little bit is a little bit the result of nostalgia, but at the same time, they're fun stories. So yeah, like I said, my dad had a stack of these, and the ones that I remember the best are these three. We have the Shooting Star, we have the Castafiore Emerald, which I think is one of the best ones, and we have Tintin and the Picaros, which I always remember because of this particular face in it, which is just so hilariously cartoonish. Let's see if I can find it. It's near the beginning. Here it is. Yeah. General Tapioca, who is a... Can I... There he is, right there, General Tapioca. You can see that these books they're big, they're large, like, A4 size, or even a little over A4 size books. And so despite the fact that they're comic books, they do have quite a bit of wordage in them. There are some pages where there's just some light conversation, like something like this, you can see. Just kind of light conversation, not too many words per page, maybe 100 to 200 words on a page, maybe even less on some pages. But then there are some pages where there's really heavy conversations, and then there's even some pages where Hergé came up with like a fake newspaper page to do. So like, it took me longer than I expected to read all of these, just because I kind of was like, oh, I'll go through these real quick, but like, there are 1,400 pages worth of it, and while most pages have only 100 words, there are some that have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more here and there. So what can I say about these stories? They're fun to read. They're as long as you're not they're not really suited for binge reading, as I tried to do. I definitely was getting tired of reading them by the end that I finished the last one. And then there's the collection that I have also has this one, which is incomplete, and Hergé died before he finished it. Back when I was a kid, I had no notion these were in any particular order, which is fine. You don't have to necessarily read these in any particular order. There are a couple of them that are kind of paired, but generally speaking, the adventures are largely self-contained. Let's see. These aren't like super complex, super like literary stories. They're really kind of aimed at kind of the 8-year-old to 8 to 11-year-old boy kind of thing. Lots of swashbuckling action, lots of planes, trains, automobiles, crashes, a little bit of gunplay, a little bit of poison darts, dangerous natives, all kinds of stuff like that. Rather cartoonish villains. These they're fun, but at the same time, you're not going to find any particularly well-developed characters. I mean, the characters are likable, right? They are fun, they are colorful, they have their own little quirks and stuff like that. But at the same time, they're kind of basically the same at the start of each book as they were in whatever other book you're looking at for the most part. There's some bits where the characters get a little bit irritating, like Professor Calculus is deaf but doesn't like to admit it, and so like him mishearing everything eventually makes scenes in which he appears just frustrating at some point. Because you have a bunch of dialogue that's supposed to be happening, but what you actually have are two unconnected monologues, and often one of the monologues is directly in conflict with the other, which is a little bit irritating to read. But at the same time, generally speaking, Hergé did a lot of kind of research to kind of make these books feel authentic to where they are. At the same time, there's plenty of stereotypes and stuff like that. He didn't shy away from that. He wasn't particularly politically correct, let's say, in a lot of places. But at the same time, you get to see different places of the world. There's kind of a little the barest hair of like an edutainment kind of feel to some of them, where like suddenly they'll talk about some little cultural aspect of some group in some place in the world, and you do get to see art and you get to see art that's based on art and cultural artifacts from various places in the world. It's and they're fun stories that never kind of stop, but they also kind of do get a little bit repetitive, especially early on. Like the first book. Oh God, I gotta lug these all up. Ah! Okay, hold on here. The first book is called Tintin in the Land of the Soviets. And this one's a little thicker, actually. This one's not 60 pages. This one's more like 100 pages. And this was the first one. And, like, this one's, what is it? Yeah, it's like 130, 140 pages. And, of course, like, the art is much simpler in this one. The plot is also basically the same thing over and over and over again. Tintin gets sent to the USSR to do reporting there, and basically he gets onto a thing that moves. Someone decides to stop the thing that moves. He gets knocked off the thing that moves. He goes to find another thing that moves. If you ever see any, if you were ever in a world where you're getting onto a plane or a train or an automobile or anything, a truck, and you saw someone who looked like Tintin, you get off that device, that transportation device immediately, and you take the next one, because throughout the whole series, he practically can never get onto any kind of transportation device and actually like have it make it to the end of its trip. The number of times that the trip like works without some kind of horrible like hitch happening, a crash or a danger of some sort, are much fewer than the times that he gets onto a plane and goes somewhere with no problems. Usually that's at the very end or the very beginning of the story. Anytime in the middle, you just don't get onto a plane or a train or a car with Tintin, or a bus. You just don't do it. As I went through these, you can see the art getting gradually better, and it kind of plateaus relatively early. Like, Hergé's art style is already pretty good by the time you get to Tintin in America. And here's Tintin in Tibet, which is one of the later ones. Like, the characters remain cartoonish, but they are consistent and well differentiated. The backgrounds are detailed when they need to be. Even the machinery is detailed a lot of the time. Let me see if I can find a good example of that. Here we go. This is a page where you can see this plane kind of landing on this very short runway. And you can see that like the wheels and the lights and stuff are all very detailed. So Hergé was good at kind of showing off these different things one way or another. And they're generally speaking well-drawn comics, and they're looking pretty good by the third or fourth book. Let's see, other things worth talking about. I guess the bottom line is, before I go into like some details of the ones that I kind of remember, the thing to remember is that these are going to be kind of Simpsons-esque characters. They're going to be basically the same at the start of each story. There's not going to be any really like complicated character arcs. The plots are going to be fairly simple, but they get a little bit more complex as you go through the series. Like I said, the first book is literally get onto a bus blows up. The next couple of books, every single official is corrupt, and Hergé uses the corrupt official over and over and over and over and over again to the point that it gets a little bit repetitive. But later on, he starts to mix it up a bit more, and things become a lot more interesting. This book is perhaps one of my favorite ones, the Castafiore Emerald, and the reason that I like it so much is that it's actually kind of a good example of like, there's a lot of characters in these books who either don't talk right, don't listen, or don't hear. And in the Castafiore Emerald, or there's a language barrier. And in the Castafiore Emerald, so many of these characters get concentrated in one spot that you get this horrifying comedy of errors that just goes through the whole book, and it's very, very well done. Generally speaking, the comedy, these books have a lot of comedies, but they're usually like one-shot sight gags and stuff like that for the most part. I would say that I didn't laugh out loud too much while reading these books, but at the same time, you can recognize, oh, here he was trying to do a joke, here he was trying to do a joke. And it's kind of vaguely funny, but it's also a little bit juvenile, a little bit repetitive. So, again, targeted to kind of the 8 to 11-year-old child kind of area. Another one that I remember, I already showed you some stuff for the inside of this one, is Tintin and the Picaros. This is one of the later books, but even the conversations sometimes can get pretty wall of texty. And it's one of those things where, like, remember how I mentioned that, what was it? I was reading, Amazing Stories? And there was that novel by Jules Verne, Off on a Comet. And I read that one, and it was like 90 pages, and it took forever. And, similarly, because these books have such small text on such a large thing, it still takes quite a long time to read them all. I don't know. I'm not sure how much more time I want to spend on these. When I first started this, I was going to kind of like start with an episode of like my 3 that I remember most fondly, and then kind of go from start to finish, maybe 3 books at a time for a bunch of different videos. But I kind of decided after reading them that probably it's not actually right now worth the time to do that. Like, again, I got to the point where I started realizing that the plots aren't really memorable. The characters are memorable, which is a good thing. But at the same time, some of the characters can be very frustrating. Castafiore and Calculus are 2 good examples of frustrating characters. Captain Haddock shows up several books in, and he becomes a constant character through the rest of the story, throughout the rest of the books. He's a very fun character, kind of the drunken captain. It's another thing worth noting that even though these books are kind of targeted at the 8 to 11-year-old boy kind of audience, that there's a lot of smoking and drinking, and there's a lot of them trying to stop drug runners and gun runners. So like it's not like overly like kiddified, if that makes sense. Like the complexity of the stories is low, but like there's a fairly consistent these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, and we got to stop the bad guys from doing bad things. Captain Haddock frequently gets drunk, but it's never shown as like a good thing. But at the same time, like a small amount of responsible drinking is seen as, it's fine. Very kind of very European perspective, for me as an American reading it. Considering that there's 22 plus 1 partial of these, and then there's actually like 1 or 2 more, actually. There's one that's the book of the animated film, Tintin and the Lake of Sharks, which was not included in this collection that I bought. But anyway, let me spend just a couple of minutes talking about these 3 that I remember. And this one is interesting because this is the one that I mostly remember the best from when I was a kid. And I looked up the history of this, and the history of this is actually really, really funny. Because this is Tintin the Shooting Star is actually the one, or it's one of like the 1 or 2 books that Hergé wrote and drew and serialized while he was working for a newspaper that was part of Belgium when they were taken over by the Nazis. Now, like people will maybe I've heard people complain about this particular book and how it portrays the villain is a Jewish person or something like that, and that was its original portrayal. He was Blumenstein, a banker from New York. When the war was over, they rewrote it so that his name is Bullwinkle, and he's from Sao Rico, which is just some kind of nondescript South American thing. And it's funny because they put the name Bullwinkle in there because Bullwinkle was a Brussels word for a candy store, but apparently Bullwinkle is also a Jewish surname, albeit a much rarer one. To be honest, when I was a kid and I saw the word Bullwinkle, I thought more Rocky and Bullwinkle than anything else. But yeah, it's this is a funny story because it's written like someone mentioned in something I was looking at. This particular plane that they're using is one that, like, this particular seaplane was like a German military seaplane kind of thing, and during World War II, right? But at the same time, it's a fun story that you see Bullwinkle a couple of times throughout the story, and there's never any particular there's never any, oh, he's bad because he looks like this or anything like that. It's funny because when I looked this up, Hergé, when Brussels was taken over by Germany in World War II, Hergé was offered a job at one particular newspaper, and he said, no, I don't want that job because I think it'll be too political. And so he took a different job at a different newspaper where presumably he assumed or was told that he wouldn't be, shackled to any particular political position. There's definitely a little bit of kind of editorial push in this one. You can kind of see it just from Bullwinkle's design, right? But at the same time, the story is so harmless that after the war was over, a bunch of Hergé's colleagues, I believe 6 of his colleagues at that particular newspaper, were still brought to a military tribunal, and 6 of them were sentenced to death because of the things that they had published during those years when Belgium was under Nazi control. And one of Hergé's friends was one of the people who was sentenced to death, but his sentence was commuted later on. And I didn't look too deeply into it, but when I read this, I was like, wow, that's really kind of surprising. But Hergé was so harmless, was so what's the word? Unideological during those years, that when the military tribunal came together and they were like, well, should we charge this Hergé guy? They're like, no, the stuff he drew was so basic and so hard, so inoffensive that if we tried him at all, it would be a waste of our time and probably it would make us look really bad. And so he just kind of went free, as probably he should have, seeing as how he wrote a comic book and not any real hardcore propaganda in any sense. But yeah, it's an interesting story that they took this, that he serialized this during World War II, and then later on he revamped it to kind of change the character's name to a less obviously Jewish character's name, and to change where he was working from New York to some fake South American republic or something like that. But yeah, I mean, this is basically the plot of this book is that there was a shooting star and it passed by the Earth, and it left a little meteorite chunk in the ocean. And Tintin and company are going to go try to get a sample of this meteorite. And of course, Bullwinkle is basically trying to stop them every step of the way, including using dynamite, crashing a boat into them, all kinds of, not letting them buy fuel, all kinds of stuff like that. And it was a fun story to read when I was a kid, and plus the kind of science fiction element. You can see this giant mushroom here, and that's part of the plot near the end of the story. That part, as a young science-y kid, that part appealed to me more than the let's fight drug runners or whatever part of the stories that there are. So I remember this one very fondly. Now that I look back at it, it's like, wow, that it's funny how much, or it's funny how you never recognize what the thing is, and they deliberately made it so you can't really recognize what it is after the war. But it's just funny how you can see if you look really hard, if you squint, you can see that there's a bit of editorial influence that they had on him politically, even though he took that job specifically to be non-political. Um, yeah, he declined work at Le Pays Réel, but he ended up writing propaganda sometimes anyway at this other paper, but not really propaganda to the point where they were like, this is not actionable. Castafiore Emerald is actually another really fun one. Again, the fun of this one. This is one of the few stories where they don't actually take a trip out of Brussels or out of Belgium, because it almost entirely happens within the mansion that Captain Haddock has, or the grounds of that mansion. But it's a fun story of a bunch of misunderstandings and a bunch of people who don't talk right or don't listen right or don't listen at all. Very like kind of strong-willed or pig-headed characters all together, all crammed together in one place, and the results are pretty funny, I would say, and interesting to read too. Like I like this story a lot. And then the other one I remember from when I was a kid was Tintin and the Picaros. This is a much more standard kind of Tintin story. There's a little bit of international intrigue. Bianca Castafiore gets captured as accused of being a spy. Tintin, Haddock, and Calculus go to see if they can do anything to rescue her. I haven't mentioned the Thompsons either. The Thompsons are a group of characters, or a pair of characters that show up very, very early in the series, I think in the second or third book. They're two bumbling detectives that one of them is named Thompson, Thomson, and the other one's named Thompson, Thompson, and they are extremely clumsy. A lot of the characters in this series are extremely clumsy. Pretty much the only one who isn't is Tintin. They also have a tendency to, like, one of them will say something, and then the other one will restate that, but flip the words around so that the meaning gets inverted. Yeah, we get all of them because it's hard to communicate with them too, because they're also very pigheaded, and so they show up in the Castafiore Emerald as well. But Tintin and the Picaros, Bianca Castafiore gets accused of being a spy. Tintin, Haddock, the Thompsons, Calculus, they all go to, what's that country called? I forget what the country's called, but basically it's like kind of a South American or Central American kind of dictatorship kind of country, and there's intrigue. They get brought to a place. They get tricked. Someone who says that they're there to bring them to their hotel isn't actually bringing them to their hotel. They get accused of being spies as well. They have to clear their names. They end up getting into this whole like revolutionary thing going on in the country. It's a fun story, and it's got some really goofy looking characters too. Like the picture I showed you earlier. Anyway, I don't know. This is just kind of like my basic thoughts here about Tintin. Not having read a bunch of them as a kid, they're not like which ones I read wasn't super memorable, because I'm sure I read more than just these three when I was a kid. But at the same time, the plots kind of step on each other's toes enough that, like, as I was looking through the series, I was like, did I read this as a kid? I can't remember. I guess I better put this as I don't remember this one book. And there's a lot of them in the fact that I can only remember three of them, when I probably read 4, 5, or 6 of them as a kid, means that the ones that I read were, like, the particulars of the plot were unmemorable enough that I was like, I don't remember reading this. I can't distinguish that I remember this book in particular as compared to any of the other ones. So anyway. Last words, fun stories. If you, there are a lot of people who like to give kids like really crappy like coddling like literature these days. But like this doesn't coddle you. People get shot. People set bombs, and there's drug runners, and there's violence, and there's comedy and all that good stuff. And so it's a good book. It's a good book series to kind of, you take a look at it, and then this would be something like to give to like a one of your kids or something like that who is interested in adventure stories, because they're very solid little adventure stories, and they're not too complicated, but they are fun, and they have some characters that are memorable. The plot's less so. Not a lot of like crazy developments, just kind of a lot of like, kind of repetitive, but the kind of thing that a kid will enjoy sitting down and reading. And so, yeah, that's what I've got on the Tintin series. As opposed to making it a long series of short videos, I decided to make it one relatively long video, just because of the repetition of the series, right? Like I could tell you, like, the plots are not different enough to where it makes sense to make a bunch of different videos of saying like, and then they did this, and then they did this, and do plot synopses and things like that. So yeah, we'll leave it here. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little look at an undeservedly obscure comic series. And of course, there was a movie or two as well. Stuff like there was an animated TV show when I was a kid too, and so some of these, when I read them, I was like, I remember this, I think, but I think I saw the TV show, and it wasn't one of the books that my dad had, and I wanted to keep those separate. Anyway, Adventures of Tintin. How long did it go? It went for about 40 years. Hergé died oh, that's not right. Is it this one? Flight 714, no, Picaro's is the last one. So, the last one that he made was Tintin and the Picaros, and here it says artwork copyright 1976. So he wrote these from like the late 30s to 1976. It's kind of like his main work that he's known for in his life. He did write The Adventures of Joe, Zeta, and Jocko, which is 3 more books, and yeah, I mean, it's just kind of a nice legacy, and it's something that reminds me of my childhood a lot. So every once in a while, I'll go and I'll pick a random one of these and check it out, and they're set up so that you can do that for the most part. There's like 3 of them where they're paired, but again, the individual adventures are pretty well compartmentalized. Anyway, Tintin, Adventures of Tintin, Hergé, Belgian artist, part of my childhood. Hope you enjoyed this, and hope you maybe go take a look at one of these and see what you think of it. Because even though they are kind of targeted at the 8 to 11-year-old kind of boy, 8 to 11-year-old boy kind of audience, they're still not like bad to read. Although they did get a little bit repetitive as I tried to binge read, 1,400 pages of them in a week. Anyway, that's what I got for today. I'll try to have something else up later in the week, but that's what I've got, so I'll see you later. If you like the channel, if you like what I'm doing, you know what to do. Links in the description, all that good stuff, and I will see you next time. Have a good one.